Welcome to the Tara Palmeri Show. I'm Tara Palmeri, your feared and fearless political journalist, and this is our first episode of the new season. And I'm starting off with a controversial figure in the Democratic Party who has the old guard, the establishment, up in arms as he says the only way to save the party with a 27% approval rating is to basically break it apart. And that's David Hogg. You know him, the 25-year-old survivor of the Parkland High School massacre.
We need to address the gun industry the way we needed to address the tobacco industry. We need to address why people want to smoke the same way that we need to address why somebody wants to pick up a gun.
And now a vice chairman of the Democratic National Committee. So he is technically a party insider, but he thinks that they have to get aggressive about rooting out what he calls asleep at the wheel incumbents, Democrats who just so happen to be older. They've been in office for a long time. So it's become a little bit more of a generational battle as he backs younger challengers. He's putting $20 million behind them in this primary. His positions have the party poobahs absolutely furious because they say that he should be focusing on flipping red states blue, not challenging members of their own party.
Well, why don't somebody sue David Hogg? He's an officer of the Democratic National Committee. He is the vice chairman of the Democratic National Committee, and he's running against other Democrats. But I might give the DNC $10 and sue him. He's a contemptible little twerp.
And David has some words for James, too. And James is coming on the show next week, so I've asked David to come back on so that they can debate each other one-on-one. David and I also talk about why it's time for the party to come clean. And he makes a shocking admission about what he wished he said to President Biden in the Oval Office, what he just couldn't bring himself to say. Take a listen here. David, thanks for coming on the show. I've got to say, I really respect your fearlessness. You have been through a lot in your life, 25 years old. You survived the Parkland massacre, and you are now taking on some really, really powerful people with what you are choosing to do by backing challengers to incumbent Democrats who have been in their seats for many years, people who are in the most senior positions of power in the Democratic Party. As you say, you want to infuse it with fresh blood, younger people, try to take out the gerontocracy, as you might say. And, I wanted to really talk to you about this because the Sunday shows all week, you announced you're putting $20 million behind these candidates. And on the talk shows, and I had Rahm Emanuel on my show last week too, and they were all like, what is he doing? We need this money to flip red seats to blue seats, which is arguably true. When people talk about you, it is so polarizing. They either love what you're doing or they hate what you're doing. And so how do you feel about that?
One, what I would say is that there are a lot of people who do not understand what we're doing here. So let me start out by clearing that up. We are not just spending $20 million in primaries, as has been reported a lot. Part of our program is going to be challenging some of the least effective and most asleep at the wheel Democrats in Congress. But we're also going to be supporting young people that are in frontline seats. And I would say that the least of our problems right now is a cash problem. We raised $2 billion last election cycle and still lost by as much as we did, and lost voting share with nearly every single demographic. This is a major brand problem that we have that is not going to be fixed just by putting a couple $100 million behind frontline candidates who, no matter what, are going to get that money behind them because we need to win back the House.
Yeah, I was going to say $20 million is like a drop in the bucket when you think about how much money that we raise in politics now.
And we are supporting frontline candidates. And this isn't just for Congress either. This is also for state legislatures. So last year, Leaders We Deserve, most of the work that we did was in state legislatures. A large amount of the work that we're going to do this year is going to continue being in state legislatures in frontline seats to help gain Democrats the majority where there's a young person running there. And the last part is it's easy for people to assume, well, we just want to get rid of all the old people in Congress. Look, unfortunately, this is more nuanced than that. There are older people who are great, there are young people who suck, and there are, and vice versa. Unfortunately, it's not as simple as saying, well, if you're above a certain age, you're terrible. It's not true, right? Nancy Pelosi has done an incredible job of fighting back against Donald Trump, helping pass the first federal gun law in 30 years, and we need people like her there in Congress to mentor the next generation. And I have full faith with somebody like her that if the time comes that she knows that she isn't ready to serve anymore, that she will decide that ultimately. So this is not about necessarily just age, although our candidates are young, obviously. It is about effectiveness. It's not about being out with the old and in with the new. It is about being out with the ineffective and being in with the effective.
I mean, Nancy Pelosi wasn't exactly effective in the last election in terms of getting Joe Biden out. And she has been a part of this party establishment that frankly has been kind of undemocratic when it comes to the party primaries. I mean, I don't think that you can really praise her and, say that she doesn't have anything to do with this gerontocracy moment that we're in right now. Well, although I do admire her for stepping down, which others refuse to.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that in terms of her legislative accomplishments, which is what I look at most in a member of Congress in terms of what matters to me, I have nothing for praise for her right there. I will say, broadly speaking, with the establishment of the party, obviously there have been challenges in the past with how we handle primaries. But what I would say is to people that have issues with this, imagine where we would be right now if we didn't have AOC. Imagine where we would be if we didn't have Cory Booker. Imagine if we didn't have, Ro Khanna or Eric Swalwell or even Hakeem Jeffries. All of them, when they got started in Democratic politics on the way to their positions or for their positions, primaried Democrats in order to get there. And this is a healthy process. What I'm not saying is that we need to go out there and challenge people that are in frontline districts. There's plenty of frontline candidates that are more moderate that I personally do not agree with, especially on things like guns. As you can imagine, that is deeply personal for me, and it's hard to see when they vote a way different from how I would want them to. But I understand there's going to be people that vote different ways in those districts. We're not trying to challenge people in those districts that are potentially going to cost us the House if there was a Democratic challenger in that primary against the Democratic incumbent. What we're trying to do is support younger people that are running in primaries in safer seats, and when there is a young person running in a competitive seat that can help us win back the House or get a majority in a state legislature, we're going to support them.
Okay, I want to go back to the idea of the fact that, the blue wave in 2018 recruited people like AOC, Ayanna Pressley, who took out incumbents, right? But they are very polarizing figures at the same time, and some people blame them for the party's more extreme positions that, created this impression that it's the woke party, and some say led to the party losses, frankly, in the following election. Are you concerned about recruiting candidates like them that might alienate? I've watched a lot of your interviews in the past, and you said something that Senator John Fetterman said on my show, that he's not sure that this is a party for men anymore. Are you concerned that these younger candidates might be too far to the left?
Look, I think we want to make sure that we have candidates that are the most representative of their constituencies possible. Sometimes that's going to look like a candidate that is, not as very progressive as an AOC, for example, can be in a place like New York City. But let's not forget too that she's one of the highest rated politicians nationally in our party right now, and it's because she's authentic and she says what she believes in. I think across the board, what I would really like to see from the candidates that we support is, one, of course, they need to be good on guns for our candidates if we're going to support them. Two, that they're going to be supportive of major campaign finance reform and lowering costs for people. We have seen the erosion of the American dream for so many people around the country that are, especially our young people, that are losing faith in democracy because they feel like they've done everything that we've been told. We have some of the highest rates of education and, unfortunately, some of the highest rates of student debt. We have some of the lowest rates of alcoholism, some of the highest rates of political participation, and yet we still find ourselves graduating into a world crushed by student debt and a housing crisis and the epidemic of gun violence and so much more. And Democrats' response seems to be, well, let's just say that we need to defend democracy endlessly. What we need to do to defend democracy is build the strongest Democratic Party possible that uses democracy to fight back against special interests that have crushed the American dream. That's why our candidates as well, they agree not to take corporate money, because we want to give young people the hope and the faith that there's somebody there that can represent them. So what I would say is we're here to support candidates that reflect their constituencies. AOC obviously reflects hers, but we also have more moderate candidates that reflect.
But she's a loud voice for the party, and she doesn't represent the whole party, but she is probably the loudest voice. And at this moment is the only one who seems to be really leading it forward, especially in this leadership vacuum that we're seeing.
Right, and I think part of the reason why she resonates so much with people, even just across the board, is in part because she clearly believes in what she's saying. People want somebody who is real and authentic, right, even if they're more in a frontline seat, for example, where they need to be more moderate potentially, people want to know what you're doing across the board, no matter if you're a Democrat or Republican. People don't like corrupt politicians. We need to do everything that we can with our candidates to show that there are people in the Democratic Party who don't take corporate money, who do represent them, and are there to fight for them in Congress, regardless of whether or not that's in a rural part of Wisconsin or if it's in the middle of a major city, for example.
Listen, I'm not for taking corporate money, but it's going to be hard to fight the Republicans without it, right?
Well, I would say, actually, we see for most candidates who do not take corporate money that they are able to raise significantly more than the people who do, and they're able to have much more trust with their voters. And I think part of this is part of the reason we're doing this is to address that very low approval rating. We need people that are able to do what is necessary in order to stop and slow Trump from destroying people's 401ks that across the board, everybody doesn't want to see go down. He's wrecking our economy and creating new existential crises every day. And it's insane. It is an indictment of our party right now that we have a 27% approval rate, right?
And the thing is that's so crazy is that they're actually just planning their next, like the 26 midterms are just all about the anti-Trump movement. Like you can't plan on the anti-Trump movement for 2028. You have to start your movement now for 2028.
Exactly.
You can't just make everything a referendum on Trump because there will be no Trump at some point.
Absolutely. And what we need to do that...
And no one else can pull off Trump like Trump, as we know. So I don't think there's going to be another Trump. Even his son can't pull it off.
Absolutely not. He does not have anywhere near the cultural pull that his father does. What we need to do, though, is provide in that vacuum of making sure that we're not just against Donald Trump, that we are against the things that empowered Donald Trump, the special interests, people like Elon Musk, who have incredibly low approvals that are associating themselves with Trump and using the White House to sell cars, to sell cryptocurrencies as one of the largest grifts that we've ever seen in our nation's history, even as they destroy our economy. What we need to do is show a proactive vision that, in my opinion, is centered around three things. One, making the American dream achievable again by reviving it. And that starts out with costs. Right now, far too many of our young people feel like, especially our young men, feel like college is not an option because it is astronomically expensive.
Right.
They feel like they are going to be crushed not only by the child care crisis that our country is going through, but also by the elder care crisis. And I felt this personally. After the DNC, I had to go home, the convention, I had to go home to take care of my father in his final days of Parkinson's disease. And despite being a veteran, despite being a medically retired FBI agent, his cost of care every month to have 12 hours a day of at-home care was $19,000 a month.
Jesus, that's incredible.
That is with him having all the insurance that he should have. The only reason why my family did not go bankrupt is because my father didn't live long enough for that to happen. We have far too, and unfortunately, my story is not unique. There are millions of Americans that are living through similar situations and are going to continue living through them. And what we need to do is show how the Democratic Party is fighting to make it so that Americans do not have to make impossible decisions like we faced when my father was on his deathbed, because unfortunately they are, and they should not have to in the richest country in the world. I think the other two parts of that message that we need to talk about are what are we doing to fight against crime and gun violence to make sure people are safe in their communities, and how are we fighting against corruption and reforming the campaign finance system so that politicians only represent their constituents and not special interests?
Yeah. So, you often talk about these Democrats who are asleep at the wheel, right? But you never really name them. So who are these Democrats?
They're people who I hope retire very soon.
Come on, tell me who they are.
Well, I'll tell you examples of who they aren't, right? I think examples of who they aren't are people like Senator Van Hollen, who are not just standing around and saying, oh, I'm in the minority, we can't do anything, right? He literally got on a plane and went to El Salvador. What it looks like, even are people like Cory Booker, who gave that speech, which, of course, how much is that really going to do? Not much, but we're in the minority, and it's hard to do a lot of stuff, but at least he shows that we're trying to do something. What it looks like are people.
But don't you think people should know if they have a target on their back right now?
Well, I think that if they start to think about whether or not they have a target on their back, they should question themselves why. And I want to try to give them the chance to get their act together and go out there and fight. Because here's the deal. If you are effective, you should not have anything to worry about here. And if you are anxious by this, if you are a member of Congress, you should ask yourself why and do one of two things. Either get your act together or announce that you're not going to run for re-election and help to mentor the next generation to step up and replace you. Because
what about David Scott? There's a news story in Punchbowl today that there are a number of primary challengers trying to oust a 79-year-old veteran from Georgia.
There are a lot of primary challengers around the country, and what we're looking at right now.
No comment on David Scott. What do you think?
Not currently, because what we're looking at across the board is we don't want to have to do this, right? We want to make sure that our members, if they reach the moment where they realize that they cannot do this, that they step aside so that this isn't as necessary. Because I want as much of our resources as possible to go to helping support our frontline candidates, but in part of doing that is building the strongest Democratic Party possible that is able to fight back against Donald Trump and meet this moment right now. Examples of what doesn't look effective is like if you are failing to meet your committee assignments, if you're failing to show up at committee, if you were struggling to actually get through committee meetings. And there are, frankly, just too many wing cliques across our party right now. And what I'm waiting for with this is either for people to get more of their act together to meet this moment and fight back, or to announce that they're not going to run for re-election.
Yeah. Does Chuck Schumer need to go?
I think Chuck Schumer does not have an election coming up. And what I would say is that that is up to the people of New York and whether or not he decides to go. And that vote was incredibly tough, to be honest, obviously. That was an incredibly tough vote. But what I think we miscalculated.
You mean the vote to pass to keep the resolution, the continuing resolution, the funding bill, to keep the government open.
Right. And part of what happened there was I would say a misstep between the coordination between the House and the Senate, in part because we thought that Republicans weren't going to be able to get all of the votes that they needed to get it through the House, and then they did. And we didn't have it.
That's kind of not having your finger on the pulse, wouldn't you say?
Well, we certainly, and I think that there are people who could have made different decisions in that situation, but ultimately I would say as well that Schumer is there for a reason. It's because he historically has known what he is doing, and I know in that position, ultimately, he does not have a re-election right now. He does not have the majority, and if he decides that he's not able to meet this moment, I know that he's going to make that decision, and ultimately the people of New York are going to make that decision for him, regardless of because I'm sure there's going to be challenges out there.
Okay, and so when you say asleep at the wheel, I know you said a bunch of things about not showing up to committee assignments, et cetera, but it does seem like a big part of your strategy is calling Trump out, and do you have any concern about being seen as overreactive and not letting Trump take the lead? Because as someone who covered Trump as a White House correspondent and continues to cover him now, he takes pride in the fact that he can shoot off a text, a truth. He can send out an executive order, and he knows that it may not have any heft to it. It may not really matter. It's a messaging strategy, and what he wants is to own the libs, see them freaking out. I remember being on the couch and hearing him on the other end of a line, and he's talking about how he said he bragged about how his nuke was bigger. My button is bigger than yours, like the nuclear button, talking about Kim Jong-un. And he's cracking up and he's thinking, think about how the libs are going to react to that. Are you worried that the reaction is just going to be about how easily the party is being owned if it's all about calling Trump out?
It's not. What I would say is this isn't even about what's politically right or not. It's about the future of our country and that people's lives are at stake. And the party that claims to be of law and order has completely disregarded the Supreme Court, as we've seen with a lot of the people that have been sent to El Salvador. And they have disregarded due process entirely and said that they want to start sending Americans there. You cannot say that you support the Constitution, that you eat, breathe, and love constitutional law, and completely disregard due process and just disappear people. What we need to be talking about are the real effects that Donald Trump is having on the American people. And I don't think what that looks like is saying, oh my God, he's renaming the Gulf of Mexico. I don't care about that.
But I do want to go back to the whole idea. I do want to go back to what you talked about. Of course, due process is super important. And Democrats are going to El Salvador and they're showing up. But then you've also got, Van Hollen, Senator Van Hollen, who you gave a shout out to, going on Fox News saying he's not vouching for the man, Abrego Garcia, in his case, and he would support a court deporting him. And I guess I understand what he's saying, as long as due process is followed. But I'm not challenging you because I don't agree with you on the due process and the fact that we have to honor the Constitution. And it is frightening that any of us could get picked off the street, essentially, if he's saying that he could deport homegrown terrorists. What is that even supposed to mean? And you're seeing students being deported for freedom of speech reasons. I just wonder if the party has to be more careful in general when they're picking their fights?
I think what we need to focus on is the due process point here. And I also think that we need to be more proactive in creating fights against Donald Trump in the first place and not letting him dictate the narrative. I think part of that is making sure that we're more active on social media. Part of the reason he's able to do this is because he is just a content machine. He is posting constantly and basically laying out what everybody in the party is talking about that day. And what we need to be doing is we need more people who are native to social media, who understand how to communicate on there and how to combat Donald Trump. And I think we've started to see more of that. We've seen people like Jeff Jackson in North Carolina, for example, as the Attorney General, be very successful on TikTok talking about what he's doing to hold bad actors accountable. And ultimately, what drives the politics that I think that we should have is it's about that we need to do what is right. It's not necessarily about what just the political experts who brought us here say is smart. Because let's remember, we had $2 billion last election cycle, and those experts like James Carville were saying, we're going to win a landslide. And then we had the result that we did. And we seem to act like there isn't any major reflecting that we need to do when we have a 27% approval rating, even as the president is disappearing people and denying due process and shredding our Constitution.
Okay, back on the James Carville topic, I saw that he called you a contemptible little twerp. You called him timid, which I think was probably one of the bigger insults. He's coming on my show next week, and I was wondering if you would be open to coming on for like 10 to 15 minutes and having this debate with him on the show. He said he's game. It'd be like next Tuesday at 2:00.
If I can make it work in my schedule, certainly. I have a very busy week next week.
I know
but
you're
what
busy.
I will say is, look.
You could even come on from a FaceTime video and just like check in. But I'd rather like let you two kind of, I think it would be interesting to hear the two of you kind of hashing it out.
And what I would say about him in particular is that I don't take the people who disagree with me personally, right? I see it as a strategic disagreement with where we're at right now with the future of the party. I believe that we need to do something about our 27% approval rating. And there's nobody in this town that has presented an actual plan to deal with that because it is uncomfortable to address that.
Yeah,
especially when
I
the
think you're
president
right.
is being as bad as he is. And what I would like to hear from James, even if I'm not able to come on, is what do we do about that 27% approval rating? Because correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't he write an op-ed in the New York Times saying basically Democrats need to essentially just hide and wait for Donald Trump to mess everything up? And
he was in for the. There's a feeling that let Trump destroy it and we'll pick it up. Your argument is essentially let's dismantle the party and rebuild it.
Well, it's not entirely dismantling the party, to be clear. I think that we need to make sure that when we have that approval rating, that we are, instead of having a wildfire where people are getting taken out around the country, and even including in our frontline seats where people the American people are so furious they just start running everywhere in our primaries against Democrats, that we're trying to make sure that we have that anger contained in a productive way within our primary process and give voters in their districts the options. Look, Leaders We Deserve is not deciding who wins or loses these elections. The voters and the constituents of these members of Congress are ultimately what are deciding these elections. And we're about challenging people who are unwilling or unable to meet the moment. And the comment that I had for James about being timid in particular came from that idea of we need to not say anything, we need to hide right now. I don't think that's what we should be doing when we're literally seeing people get disappeared, where we're seeing Donald Trump stomp all over the Constitution, due process, and so many other protections that we've fought for hundreds of years to help protect and create in this country, and not just stand on the sidelines and say, you know what, we're just going to wait until midterms. Because there's a big disagreement right now between the top of our party and the elected leaders of our party and the base. The elected leaders seem to think we just need to wait for midterms because that is going to be the most effective thing that we can do. And of course, that makes sense. We don't have the majority right now. It's just hard for us to do anything. But the base, they feel unheard and like we are not fighting hard enough for them. And what we need to do is unite together to make them feel heard and show them how we are fighting back against Donald Trump.
I believe you will win the midterms. I mean, it's only 3 or 4 seats. It's pretty much a guarantee. And
I wouldn't say that's necessarily a guarantee right now.
Oh, really?
I would argue, if you look at the generic Democratic ballot at the moment, that we are ahead by about 0.7 to 1% in that ballot. we typically need to be ahead by 2 or 3% in order to be able to win a midterm election. And what concerns me with our approval rating as bad as it is right now, when we're going to spend hundreds of millions of dollars, and I mean the party in general is going to spend hundreds of millions of dollars in order to help win those frontline seats, obviously. What we need to be concerned about, though, in my view, is that when people walk into that ballot box in our frontline districts, of course, they're thinking about that member and the 50 million pieces of mail and TV ads that they've seen about them, I'm sure. But what they're thinking about, I would argue far more, is how do I think about the Democratic Party? And that is a culmination of our 200 plus members of Congress and other leaders in our party that are all over the country, that include in our safe seats. And they're going to ask themselves, does this person represent me? Do I feel like they're fighting for me? And right now, with that approval rating, I would argue that we are at a real risk of not being able to win back the House because of that.
Okay, so I had Rahm Emanuel on my show, and I asked him about this whole idea that he brought up on Jon Stewart's show about coming clean. The party needs to come clean, and he said, I guess he meant more so about how they've set up Americans for this moment in time where they don't feel like their economic prospects are good, that the American dream is lost for their children. But when I asked him about coming clean, I meant coming clean about the last election, about the last 4 years. I mean, a big part of the reason why the Democratic Party is so unpopular is because of what happened in the Biden administration and how he was so clearly unable to lead. There was a cover-up of his position. Now, in that same interview, I asked Rahm Emanuel, when did you know about Biden's condition? Who did you tell? What did you do about it? I think that a big thing is that there's not a lot of trust in the party because of how that was handled, because that no one has ever really come clean. Like, how can you trust a party that covered up the condition of a president? Like, do you agree with me that everyone who worked very closely with Biden, who was in the top of his administration, like, they have to admit what happened to move forward? Or are we just supposed to brush this one under the rug?
We should not brush it under the rug, and we need to be honest with people. One of my biggest regrets of the time that I've worked in politics was the time that I met with President Biden and I talked to him and he said, how do I win young voters? And we were in the Oval Office together. What I wish I had told him was that he needed to drop out of the race. Unfortunately, of course, that is hard to say to a sitting president of the United States, let alone the fact that I would not have been listened to and I would have been laughed out of the room. But at least I would have told him what he needed to hear rather than what he wanted to hear. And I think broadly speaking, in some senses, that is the bigger problem with our party in general. I am very worried right now that I think that this could be a Biden 2.0 situation that we're in. I'm doing this because I don't want that to happen again. I don't want to make that mistake again, and I know I'm going to take heat for it, but ultimately we are in a real crisis in our party right now. And what I'm saying is that we should handle this in our safer Democratic seats to address how we do our soul searching and finding ourselves and not potentially threaten our frontline districts so that we can also get support behind them and not have a 27% approval rating. I think what we need to do more than anything as a party is be more honest in addressing how people are feeling. This past election, when I was asked why we lost, I said, look, we told voters two things. We heard from voters that prices were too high and Joe Biden was too old. With $2 billion behind us, with those purported experts like Carville and other people saying, we got it, we're going to win in a landslide, we told those voters effectively, no, he's not, then yes, he is. Then we said when it came to prices, no, they aren't. If you tell voters not to believe their eyes or their wallets, you are going to lose them. What I think we need to do much more, what I would say that we need to do much more of in regards to what could have been done is say, look, we just went through the largest economic disruption since the Great Depression. We had to save our economy, and sometimes the economy is going to get too hot and it's going to have inflationary effects, and we're doing everything we can to bring those prices down, but we understand that these prices are too high and we are working to bring them down right now. But this is the consequence of us avoiding a far bigger disaster that would have happened had we not stimulated the economy during COVID. And then I think the other thing is we need to build a party that tells people what they need to hear, even if they don't want to hear it. And that's why I'm doing this. I am deeply concerned for the future of our party. We lost vote share with nearly every single demographic except the elderly and highly educated. A party that continues to have those losses doesn't have much of a future. And I will tell you, even though this idea that I am doing is very, with at least some people in this town, very unpopular, there has been a remarkable number of people. Look at my TikTok comment section. Look at the comments on Instagram, Facebook, and elsewhere. They are overwhelmingly positive. And that's what I'm looking at. It's not, oh, how do I keep everybody in this town happy? It's how do I make sure that the people outside of this town who are actually deciding who is in this town are happy and feel represented by our party. That's why I'm doing this. It's not to risk the majority in Congress trying to settle this in safer seats and support frontline candidates, but make sure that our young people and people that are unsatisfied with where our party has gone feel like they actually have a voice and feel like Democrats are here to fight for them.
Wow. Okay. Well, that's interesting to hear. Thank you for being so honest and open about that. Very few people in the party will ever actually be open about the feeling that they made a mistake by not saying anything.
I'm not here to be a politician. I am here for us to win, and the best way of doing that is doing the right thing and being honest.
So you think that the others should too, if they want to be taken seriously again, that the rest of the party, like the rest of the party elders, have to come out and be open about this?
Look, I can't speak for them. I can only speak for myself, obviously, and I also wasn't around. I wasn't in those rooms 24/7 like many of the other people were who were around Biden, and I will leave that up to them. But I will tell you, when it is within my control, what I can say, I am going to tell you the truth about what we've done wrong and how I believe that we can move forward. But that's part of what makes us a great party. We have everybody from people who I very much don't agree with at times, like James Carville or Joe Manchin, to people like AOC and people in between. Because you know why? We're not a cult. People say all the time, we need to have better messaging. We need to have better messaging. Our party's messaging is never going to be as centered and disciplined as a party that is a cult with a strong man at the top that says, if you don't agree with this, you're going to be excommunicated. And that is part of why I love to be a Democrat. It's not because I think we are God's greatest gift or we're perfect by any means, but it's because I believe in the party that we can be, in the party that we have been in historically, right? The reason why my family didn't face bankruptcy after my dad's diagnosis of Parkinson's is because of the Social Security safety net set up by Democrats. What I want to make sure is that we're fighting to make it so that the American people don't have to make impossible decisions like far too many families are having to make right now and far too many young people are having to make.
I want to get into one last thing, because I know you're probably really busy, but a lot of Democrats say the way to win back the working class with a populist message, try to take back the message that Trump has, right? Win back those blue-collar working-class Americans who don't really care about pronouns, trans issues, those 80-20 issues. They care more about, like, surviving, putting food on the table. Do you understand how Democrats seem to be painted because of the reactionary way that they respond to some of these 80-20 issues as only caring about that and not caring about, like, the kitchen table issues that people tend to really vote on?
Look, I think we're getting lost in talking about our messaging to some extent, because you can have the best script possible written by Shakespeare for all I care. But if you have bad actors, it doesn't matter how good that script or that message is if they aren't able to successfully deliver it. And I think part of what is happening is that when there was that message that we saw in that ad that went out from Trump saying Kamala Harris is for they, them, and I'm for you, it resonated more than anything, I would argue, because we failed to make voters feel like they were actually heard throughout those 4 years. We failed to make them feel like we were listening to them when they said that the president was too old, and we repeatedly said, no, he's not. We failed to listen to them when they said prices are too high, and we said, no, look at this chart of the G7, look at the GDP, look at the S&P, look at all these macroeconomic figures, when the reality is we should have just said, yes, we know prices are too high. This is what we are doing to address them. And we saw it even in some of the best tested ads that the Harris campaign created, that the messages that worked best were those messages that talked about, here's what we're doing to fight back against the rising cost of living, particularly around things like housing. And I think if we can get back to a real message that speaks to those voters and shows them tangibly how we are delivering to lower the cost of housing, lower the cost of healthcare, lower the cost of eldercare, and fight the corruption that has enabled those things to balloon so much in price, I think that is a winning message that can get voters across the board, no matter their race, no matter their gender, no matter their sexual orientation, because everybody needs a roof over their head, everybody hates corrupt politicians, and people want a better campaign finance system that doesn't empower special interests, because their interest needs to be first. And I think that's the message that can work.
Yeah, you talked about players, right, and rather than messaging. Not to go back to James Carville again, but he did say that running Kamala Harris was like running a seventh-string quarterback. What do you think about that?
Well, I'm surprised that he thought that we were going to win in a landslide, considering he's saying that now. And look, we all have miscalculations that we make in elections, of course, but I'm tired of this idea that we need to perpetually listen. Experience matters. It absolutely does, but it only matters as much as it actually is effective and useful because it works. And going out there and continuing to listen to people who've said time and time again that, we're going to win in a landslide, we're doing everything right, and then all of a sudden we have this and they're like, see, I told you we were doing everything wrong. That's not going to work. And what I'm trying to do is build a culture in our party where we tell people what they need to hear rather than what they want to hear, and we handle our disagreements productively in things like our safer democratic seats, instead of just saying, oh, we just need to focus on unity constantly over and over and over again.
Yeah.
When by doing that, we create a reality where nobody feels heard in our party. And we're doing the same thing that we did last election, where everybody felt like we were for somebody that wasn't them, but in our own party. That is what I am really concerned about right now, is people do not feel like we are fighting nearly hard enough for them. And that's not just me saying that. That is in the data. That you don't get to a 27% approval rating, especially as Trump is doing all this just on its own. That is because people really feel let down, and we need to show them how we are dramatically fighting to change things and handle it in a productive way that does not endanger the majority that we have in Congress.
So for people who are open to your message but are concerned about dividing and weakening the party, which I know you argue will make it a stronger party, but what do you tell them? Like, what do you say to those Democrats who worry about weakening and dividing the party ahead of the general elections?
I think right now our party is divided, and it's not even so much, it's divided by people who, the vast majority of them, who want people who fight for them, but feel like there are not nearly enough of them in Congress who are fighting for them right now. That is a real division that we need to worry about, because it's no longer, the biggest division in our party is no longer between the center and the left, I would argue. It is between, do you want to fight in this moment against Donald Trump and help to revive our democracy and revive the Democratic Party at a historic low point that it's in? Or do you want to stick with the status quo with the same consultants, pundits, and pollsters that brought our party to this place? Or do you actually want to see it change? And we need serious change. We need to handle the disagreements that we have in our party productively, and not excommunicate people because they have those disagreements, but handle them productively in our safer seats, and realize having competitive primaries in our safer seats by giving those voters options in those safer districts doesn't risk anything, and there's only potential upsides that can come with it, because the only people that are threatened by this are two types of people, I would say. One, the ineffective, who are made very anxious about this, and two, the people who benefit from the status quo staying the same and do not want it to change because they benefit from that status quo. You know who doesn't benefit?
Tends to be a lot of people who are over 60 as well.
Well, certainly. But not all of them. We have older people who are also supportive of this, which makes the story more complicated than just age. I'm thinking about who in this town is being let down right now. And I know that what I am doing here upsets people, it angers them. I know, though, unfortunately, as my generation does, what happens when our politicians are not fighting hard enough on the issues that matter most in building a successful plan. Because we've lived the consequences of those political failures. And the best way to get back from that is building the strongest Democratic Party possible. Is
there a model, past movement, leader, or party that from history that really inspires you and your strategy?
I mean, I have to be careful in how I say this because I'm not trying to compare myself to anybody that I mention here, but I think people like John Lewis are incredibly inspirational to my generation, right? Being an activist and an organizer and leader that then got elected to Congress, he's a great example of why we shouldn't just say, oh, older people don't belong. There are lots of older people who weren't given the chance when they were younger to be able to serve in Congress that are in safer seats that do deserve to be there, to be clear. And we need to help ensure that those people remain, at least the ones that are being effective, like the John Lewises of the world, remain, so that they're able to mentor the next generation and bring them up in the political process and teach them the ropes of how to get things done in politics.
So does that mean you're going to run for office?
No. If I was running for office, I would be a total sycophant that that came on shows like this and did not say half the things that I say.
I don't know. If I was going to run for office, I'd sound like you. Because I think at the time, I think the authenticity crisis that the parties are facing, that it's the people who are speaking out, who are earning the ears, especially in this attention economy when nobody's interested in the same old talking points.
Well, look, I am not running for office, and the reason why I'm doing this work with Leaders We Deserve is because I know this movement that we need to build to help fix our political system is so much bigger than one person. I want to raise the money that I have. Last year, we raised millions of dollars and supported incredible young people around the country. That resulted in us helping to break the supermajority in Virginia, or break the majority in Virginia, so that Democrats were able to gain it back. That passed 2 gun safety laws with our candidate leading that legislation, Darius Clark. That helped to break the supermajority in North Carolina with candidates like Dante Pittman. That helped to elect people like Molly Cook in Texas as well, who defeated a Democrat in an open primary, by the way, who had voted, the Democrat that she defeated, had voted to arm teachers and voted to give those teachers $25,000 for being armed in a safe seat. There was no reason he needed to do that vote because it was in a competitive seat, for example, for that Senate seat. And she won by 62 votes out there, and she's a staunch abortion rights advocate. And look, I know there are people who don't agree with this strategy here. What I'm trying to do, though, is empower my generation to come into office to build the political apparatus that we need to help fix our political system and rebuild faith of our young people in our democracy.
Okay. Well, David, this was a great interview. Thank you for your time. I
Well,
promise
James, I say hi.
it's only fair that you two actually say it face to face and really let the people
Happy to
decide.
do it.
You know what I mean?
Look,
Okay.
I don't take these things personally. No matter what names he wants to call me as a 80-plus-year-old man that I think is pretty immature, I am happy to have a conversation about strategically how do we get back to winning, because he obviously does have experience in winning. Certainly, it's not since before I was. It is before I was born, but. Of course, that campaign that he ran was legendary. There's literally movies that have been made about it.
Yeah.
So I'm happy to have that conversation.
Who knows? Maybe one day you're going to be calling someone a contemptible little twerp one day.
I hope not.
That was the official first episode of the Tara Palmeri Show. Please subscribe to this show, like it, comment, share it with your friends. Also, in the description, sign up for the audio podcast. Yes, there is an audio podcast of the Tara Palmeri Show. Share it with your friends. This is our journey. We are starting it together. I have appreciated your support along the way. We are just getting started. And let me know in the comments who you want to hear from next. You can also sign up for my reporting at tarapalmeri.com. That's TARAPALMERI.com. And you can get my newsletter, The Red Letter, for all of my exclusive reporting and scoops direct to your inbox. See you again next week.